I can take you off of mute, and you can ask a question to the entire audience. If you do raise your hand, please, you can either raise it and I can answer it, or you can write down a question, however you feel like. And again, I want to make it as interactive as possible, so throughout the presentation, you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to raise your hand. Now, as I said, my name is John Booker, and I'm with Peak Solar. We are an integrator of solar products, and basically what is an integrator? We are a designer and developer of photovoltaic systems and all other different types of solar systems, but we primarily work on photovoltaic or electric solar systems. We have 5 locations around the country, and we have 3 distribution warehouses, primarily one in the Northeast, one in California, and one in Texas. So we're centrally located throughout the whole United States. Our members have been in the industry for over 15 years, and our company has almost been in business just as long as that. Below you can see a number of examples of solar systems that we've done. Those are just examples. Now, the topics for this evening include what is solar energy, how a photovoltaic system works, what's the payback, how do I size my own system. So we're going to keep on these topics, but if you have any questions whatsoever, if there's any slides or anything, please feel free to raise your hand. Now, the first topic that we're going to go over is what is solar energy? And basically, solar energy is a form of energy that it comes from the sun. And there are really 2 different types of solar energy. There's either photovoltaic and there's thermal energy. And photovoltaic energy is direct conversion of the sunlight to produce electricity. On the other hand, thermal energy is basically taking the sun's heat, the radiation, and converting it into a form of energy. So the easiest example is if you have a hot water heater and you have these solar thermal collectors, well, that's thermal energy. Now, a photovoltaic system is going to use solar panels, it's going to use racking, it may use inverters, whereas a thermal system may use thermal collectors like solar panels. They look just like solar panels. They may look like mirrors. You may use turbines and generators. You may have a cooling tower. So there are different ways that the technology can be used. Now, primarily tonight we're going to talk about photovoltaic because that's what we specialize. But if you have any questions about thermal systems, again, we are very knowledgeable about thermal, and we can definitely point you in the right direction on any questions. If you have questions on pool heaters, solar pool heaters, that's a thermal type of system. Solar thermal heating for your house, we can also help you out on different questions and such. Now, here are a number of photovoltaic systems, and as you can see, those are they have the blue cells on their roof. Now, one of the topics is how does a photovoltaic system work, and how does it get that power? And basically, there are a number of components, basic components, to go from sun from the sun all the way to power. And basically, we're just going to start off with you're going to get the sun light, and it's going to use some type of solar cell. And these solar cells are the building blocks, the basic building blocks to collect the sun. It's going to get the rays from the sun, and it's going to basically, there are these electrons that are going to be moving, and so what's going to happen is it's going to get collected, but unfortunately the energy behind it is going to be in the form of direct current. If you have your car has DC, your battery is the form in DC. So what you need is, today with grid-tie systems, we use systems that convert the energy from DC into AC. So if you convert it from DC into AC, you need an inverter. So this is an example in the middle of an inverter that would change the energy from DC to AC. After that, basically the power would be able to be used anywhere in the grid. So this is an example of my solar home, and it is a pretty simple example of how the whole solar system works. The solar home, as you can see with my cursor from my mouse, that the solar electricity comes down from the sun, and it hits these solar panels, and you can see that these solar panels are on the home, and these solar panels will then go into an inverter. You can see right here there's an inverter that converts it from DC to AC. From that DC to AC swap, you can then take the energy and it could go into your home, and basically it goes through the breaker panel. You would hook it up to the breaker panel, and if there's a need in the house, say a light turns on, well, the electricity would go towards the light or the refrigerator or whatever you needed in the house. If, on the other hand, you have no load in the house, then the energy would then get pushed back onto the grid, and what would happen is the meter would start to go backwards, and it would then go back onto the grid. Now, in the old days, we used to use batteries, and batteries were a form to hold the energy, and we used it a lot. And what happened is they might produce hydrogen. They only lasted 5 to 7 years. They're not as cost effective as using a grid-tied system. However, some people like to have that battery option available. There are things that you can do with a battery system. Now, there is a new inverter out there that SMA just came out with a new inverter that basically, when you basically say the grid goes down, and a lot of people want to have some energy when the grid goes down. Well, there's a new inverter out there that you can turn off a switch, and you can get about 1,500 watts of energy from a plug. So that's just something that came out, and I was just up in San Francisco 2 weeks ago looking at the product, and it looks very good, and there are a lot of different uses for it. I saw a hand up, and I'm just going to take, I think Keith was here to ask a question. Keith, do you have a question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, it was my understanding that in terms of the process, and the sun hits the panels hit the inverter, that energy then goes to the inverter, from the DC to AC. And then that goes into, well, sometimes you can have a meter that can give you an idea of how much power you're using. By the way, also, can you before, two-part question, could you briefly talk about the metering options in terms of, I understand there was some sort of app I could get that would tell me online about, what my energy production was. So that's
Sure.
the second part of that question. But going back to the first part was, your picture here shows the power going into the house. I thought all the power pretty much went into the utility, and then the utility just cut you the check for the difference of what you used. Could you please explain that a little bit?
Yeah, let me explain a little bit. Let me look at the first part of your question. Now, in places, there are different places around the country where what Keith was talking about is we're going to get into it later, but that deals with like a feed-in tariff, where basically what you're doing is you would take all the energy and you would throw it back into the grid. Now, that's only really works in a couple of states. Tennessee is one example of a feed-in tariff. The TVA has a program that they take all the energy and they give you 19 cents per kilowatt hour for that energy. Long Island in LIPA has an example, and also up in Ontario, and that is Hydro One is another, the Ontario government's utility. These are prime examples of feed-in tariff. Now, on the other hand, the majority of the United States doesn't have that great of an incentive with a feed-in tariff. So what we try to do is we try to offset what your electric bill is right now. So for example, say you're in PG&E, and PG&E is all of Northern California. That might be San Francisco, Fresno, even going up to northern Los Angeles, parts of Ventura County. That would be an example of PG&E. Well, the goal in PG&E is you might be in tier number 5 and 4, and what you're really trying to do is you're trying to get your electric rate down. And so what happens is during the day, when the energy is most productive and you're not at home, you're throwing the energy back onto the grid, and your meter is going backwards all day. And then at night, you come home and your meter is starting to go forward. And in that example, what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at your patterns and your behavior, and we're basically trying to size a system that you're not going to be producing more than you need. Because there is another caveat to this. The utility company usually only wants to pay you what's called the wholesale rate. Wholesale rate basically means that if they're selling you energy at one rate, which is the retail rate, well, they're only going to sell you it back or buy the energy back at what they're producing it at. And there's 3 components of the retail rate, which includes the wholesale rate, transmission, and distribution. And they say, hey, you don't own the lines, you're not pushing the electrons through the lines, so why should we pay you that? So what we're trying to do is we're basically trying with net metering is trying to offset your current electric bill. But through government regulations, through what's called net metering, you can throw the energy back onto the grid. Basically, through net metering, we're now thinking the utility as our battery source. The old days, we had to purchase these large, crazy batteries and had to spend a ton of money. Now we're using the utility as the battery. The second question I think Keith asked was about apps and metering. We're going to get into things like in-phase and some other different products that actually you can go in and you can see exactly what the amount of energy each panel is actually using. So we're going to go into it a little later, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I just want to touch base and see. Keith, did I answer all your questions?
Yeah, you did very well. Thank you very much.
Okay. Sorry, I got a little long-winded, but I just wanted to make sure I answered everything. If anybody else has any questions, please let me know. All right. And next what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to solar modules. And we're going to move on to the type of solar modules out there. And primarily, there are tons of solar modules out there, but the majority of them are either the standard silicon and there's a thin film. And really fast, I'm going to touch briefly on thin film. Thin film is it's basically, if you look at your calculator, a calculator with thin film, that's a prime example of thin film. And what happens is with that thin film, it's very inefficient. You need a lot of thin film to basically get some energy. So what happens is we usually don't see a lot of that today. There are companies like First Solar that do massive projects in India and all around the world, and they do those type of projects. But the thin film companies are usually not around like they used to be. Now the other type of solar modules are monocrystalline and polycrystalline solar panels. And the monocrystalline and polycrystalline we're going to get into, the key difference you can see is, one, the monocrystalline are usually the dark colored modules, whereas the polycrystalline are the blue color. And it's just how they do the anti-reflective coating that basically causes the color for it. Now, just to go down, you can see some of the pros and cons what a monocrystalline panel would do. For one, it's usually higher efficiency in cells than the polycrystalline. They are what's called pseudo square. They're not a full square. As you can see right here, my cursor is pointing over, and you can see this white area. Well, in the example with the polycrystalline, you can't see any white area there. So that's a perfect example of the pseudo square is not really a square. Basically, the monocrystalline panels are usually used for limited roof space. So if you have small amount of roof space, you need a high wattage panel, you want to get as much on there, then you might use a monocrystalline panel. Now, the monocrystalline to polycrystalline is only about 10% more efficient, and you can get about 10% more. So for example, say you have a 5,000 watt polycrystalline, one of these blue cell modules. Now, with a monocrystalline, you can get a 5.5, so 5,500 watts. So you can get about 10% more energy. Now, the monocrystalline are usually a higher price, and that has to do with how the monocrystalline cells are made and the procedure behind it. The other type of module is the polycrystalline, and the polycrystalline are the square shape. They are usually a lower price, and the reason why they're usually a lower price is because they are the workhorse of the industry. An example, Germany basically has about 30% of its entire grid is from renewable energy, and it includes wind and solar. And a majority of those panels, solar panels, are polycrystalline cells. So there's a ton of massive fields of solar systems that have polycrystalline cells. So they are, again, the workhorse of the industry. They're out there, and they've been doing their job. Now, before I move on to another thing, I wanted to let you know that the solar module has been around. These type of modules, the monocrystalline and polycrystalline, have been around for about 60 to 70 years now. And if you think about any of, with NASA, any of the Apollo missions, any of the other missions, they needed solar cells. These type of solar cells, polycrystalline solar cells, to be able to use for deep exploration. So that's just one of the examples that this technology is time tested. It's not something new. These are workhorse of the industry. So now, moving along, we talked about something to collect the energy. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about what is it basically to change the energy from a DC to an AC. And there are a number of different types of inverters out there. And as you can see on the right, these are just examples of SMA inverters. As you can see right here, these are basically from maybe a 5 to 10 kW all the way up to megawatt systems, thousands upon thousands of panels. Now, inside the inverters includes 3 different categories, and the first one is called the centralized inverter. And we're going to go into more detail, but basically a centralized inverter is you have one inverter for a number of panels. You might have 20, 30 panels to one central inverter. The next one is the microinverter. And the microinverters are been around for about 10 years now, and they are usually one microinverter per panel. Now there are some hybrid versions, such as Enphase made 2 per one panel, and those consider a microinverter, but it's usually one inverter on the back of each panel. And then there is something called the power optimizers. It's like it's a hybrid between a central and a microinverter. You might use some components. There is some monitoring, but it is not as effective. From all of the data and all of the research that I've done over the years, I really don't believe in it compared to the other two. But so we're not going to talk a lot about it. But the SolarEdge or Tigo is another example that's not on here. But Tigo is an example of another power optimizer. So we're going to go into a little bit more detail, and this is an example of a centralized inverter. This is a Sunny Boy, and a Sunny Boy is the standard in the industry. SMA, the parent company that makes the Sunny Boy, is a German company that's been doing it for over 40 years. And this inverter is a time-tested, reliable product. It has come down in cost over the years. It's a low-cost solution. It's highly reliable. Now, the one problem behind it is, there's 2 things. There's something called shade intolerant. And maybe you might have heard where the microinverter companies say, hey, you might have a tree or you might have some shading, and it's going to bring down the entire system. And there is some truth to that. It will bring down some of the system because there's no electricity. To what extent the microinverter companies want you to believe that it will impair the whole system? It won't. But there is some shade intolerance. It will bring down the system slightly. Now, there is a new solution that's come out in the last 2 years. There's what's called dual MPPT. And basically what that does is, if you think about this inverter right here, think about it. Let's pretend that there's 2 inverters inside of here, and each of these inverters work independently. So for example, say you have different angles on the roof. Say you have different hips and such, or say there are different degrees. You might have a section of your panels might be on 1 degree, and then the other might be on another degree. Well, I'm not sure if you know that if you have 1 degree, that's the best. But if you have multiple degrees on the original centralized inverter, well, whatever degree is the least efficient would basically bring down the whole system. And so, if you had a flat roof and then you had some that were tilted up, well, the whole system would then act like a flat roof. So that is basically going to be bringing down some power. However, with the MPPT, if you have a flat roof section and you have a tilted roof, each one of them are going to act independently and bring you the most amount of energy. So that's a new solution that has come out. Now, a lot of people are using the microinverters out there, and this is an example, and I think Keith was talking about the monitoring system. And this product is, again, it's easy to customize, and it allows you to mount on different roof sections. It does have, at the bottom, it does have shade tolerant, and the most important thing, and I like it too, is it has a lot of online monitoring. So what you can do is, with the online monitoring, you can see in real time what's happening with all of your panels. Say, for example, you get a tree that's starting to grow up over one of your panels, and you're out of town. Well, you can see in real time what electricity is being produced. Or, for example, say you have in the middle of your panel, something's going on with one of your panels. It's not producing a lot of energy. What's going on? Maybe there's some, there's a leaf up there. There might be any thing that's going on, but you can know in real time, which is a really impressive thing. And the thing is I do recommend that this is a great solution for smaller systems. If you're going to get anywhere 10, 12, 15 kW, larger, centralized inverters make a lot of sense. And people always want to say, well, a centralized inverter is, what if it goes out and such? Well, the thing is these massive megawatt fields are centralized inverters, and they don't worry about it. So the technology is that good. So again, it all depends on what your needs are and what you're looking for. There is one more downfall of the microinverters. They are more expensive than the centralized inverter. It's about 30% more expensive. However, the price has been coming down over the last couple of years. With the introduction of the Aurora microinverter, that's just an example of other things coming to the market, and it pushes down the whole industry. Now, after the inverter comes the racking, because you got to attach it to somewhere. You might want to attach it to your roof, onto a ground, and one of the most common is a roof mount. And a roof mount includes things like rails. It might include lags, lags to truss. You might have other type of structures such as ballast. So there are a number of ways to hook it onto the roof. Again, the most common is that you might have what's called an L foot. If you look at what looks like an L, it would basically, one second, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, everybody, for that interruption. Sometimes I love programs interrupting. So again, it would look just like an L, and the L would have a lag bolt, and it would go directly into the beam of the roof. And what would then happen is you might have these train track rails on the on top of it. And it looks like train track rails, and on top of the train track rails would be your modules. Now, the other way is the actual a ground mount. And a ground mount is basically, you might have poles and screws going in with piping, and example is you can see the ground mount structure below. Now, after you deal with the inverters, the racking, and the module, you're going to have to think about, the racking and the inverters are pretty easy to pick because there's some very good companies out there. However, picking a module can be very difficult because there are thousands upon thousands of module manufacturers. And sometimes it gets overwhelming. However, there's a couple of pretty simple guidelines. And I recommend only think about what's a Tier 1 and a Tier 2 manufacturer. And a Tier 1 manufacturer is basically a manufacturer that is brand oriented. They've got deep pockets. Now, really, the first part, brand oriented, think about it this way. Nike is a great example of a brand. Sharp is a great example of brand. Sony is a great example. Well, in the solar industry, you have things like Canadian Solar, you have Trina, you have Sharp, Hyundai. They're all examples of brand-oriented companies that have deep pockets. Now, with a Tier 1 manufacturer, you also want to know that they have third-party insurance, because the third party basically means, hey, if they go out of business, is my warranty going to be available? And so the thing is like Canadian Solar, they have PowerGuard. A lot of other companies have Zurich. So and also I've seen Lloyd's of London. Now, there's also Tier 2 manufacturers, and there's a dime a dozen Tier 2. But a real Tier 2 manufacturer, they might be a low-cost, targeted module. They might not have the brand orientation or the super deep pockets. They might not be on the NASDAQ, but they do have the third-party insurance. And that third-party insurance will protect against risk if they do close down. Again, why do I harp on third party? Because, again, 6-7 years ago, when I started in this industry, the BP and Shell were the #1 solar manufacturers, and they're no longer in this industry. Now, they do warrant their panels for the 25 years, and they're multi-billion-dollar companies. But they were, I mean, if we were looking 10 years ago at modules, they were the epicenter for solar modules. Now, today, solar modules, yes, and really quickly, Keith has a question. Keith, can you hear me?
Hi. Yeah, I have I have to ask the question only because you mentioned Tier 1 and Tier 2. Are there companies that we should avoid? Are there companies that you wouldn't recommend or don't do business with because of certain issues? Or you seem the Tier 1 and Tier 2 are important, but like, what would be the negatives about like the other people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there are a couple things to look out for. And for example, I don't have any module manufacturers right now that I would say exactly to look to avoid. I would say avoid module manufacturers to say, hey, I'm going to give you the B grade cells. That's one example. I know there are companies throughout the U.S. and online that say, yeah, we're going to give you the B grade. And sometimes what that is the manufacturer might only have a 90-day warranty. One example that appalls me is Sharp. Sharp, it has a B grade module out there on the open market. I mean, they're an amazing manufacturer, but to have a B grade really sickens me. And the B grade only states that the warranty is good for 90 days. And a lot of rebates and a lot of places, you need that 25 minimum year warranty out there. So I recommend stay away from B grade. You're going to be helping yourself in the future by not going with the cheapest product. And again, you're looking at, again, you can go, module prices have gotten cheap enough with A grade. Going with B grade or the really garbage of the industry, It's just not something you should do. Um, I can do some research and I can definitely get back to you, Keith, on some of those B grades, and I can also email everybody. Did that answer your question?
Actually, more than answer, because I had no idea about the B grade option, and that's definitely something I would want to avoid.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I know we don't talk about the B grade as much here. We talk about only Tier 1 and Tier 2, but sometimes the manufacturers have this B grade, and you just want to be very careful about it. But all right. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about is picking a manufacturer. You might have you might want to know where they're made, and the majority of solar modules are now made in Korea, India, Taiwan, China, and the U.S. And a couple different points of view. The U.S. manufacturers are probably going to be about 20 to 30% more expensive than the foreign manufacturers. And again, Sharp is, even though they're a Japanese manufacturer, they produce in Tennessee. Now, the Chinese manufacturers, they're pretty good manufacturers. I've been over to a number of their facilities over the years, and the thing is they have state-of-the-art robots. As you can see right here, this is an example. A lot of those manufacturers, basically, they don't have people touching the actual solar modules. So it is pretty remarkable to see that in Asia. So, again, it really depends on what you want, but there's some great companies out there that are Chinese and Taiwan that produce great product, superior products. But again, it really depends on your specific what you like. Now, one of the things is we're going to look at what are the benefits of a solar system, and as you can see below, there's a number of benefits for a solar system. The first one is basically it's going to drastically reduce your power bills. Again, if you're in PG&E and you're paying 30 cents per kilowatt hour, I mean, with the solar system, you really are going to dramatically. You're going to go from a Tier 5 down to a Tier 1. Your benefits, a quick payback. For example, most solar systems, even in California, Go California says today that a solar system will pay itself back in 5 years or less right now. Now that's California. However, there are other parts of the country where there could be a higher, it could take a while longer to decrease, to get that payback. It's a secure investment. Again, the product has been around for 7 years now. The technology has been around, so it's a very secure investment. You're putting it on your roof, and it just sits there and produces electricity. Increases your property value. I mean, that's the true thing. It's something like, okay, if you have a pool, it's going to increase your property value. It's something like that. I mean, I've seen places where it will help to sell a house a lot faster. Someone has the exact same home, has the same value. People want the solar system because, hey, who wants to pay for the electricity? Reduce your carbon footprint. Social responsibility. Again, it's that feeling good about the doing good things for the environment. And the last one is the reduced dependence on the power company. There are a number of people every single day who call me up and say, you know what, I'm so sick of my utility company. I just want to get off the grid, and I just want to do that. And I don't want to keep them. I don't want to see my power keep going up, my electric go up and up and up. And I tell them, I mean, yeah, you're right. With a solar system, you're going to reduce your dependence. However, I don't recommend getting rid of them completely. Use it as a symbiotic relationship. Again, use it as a place where you can store your energy. It's not going to cost you anything during the day, and use their energy at night. And again, it's a good relationship. However, If you lock in your electric rate at a certain rate, you're locking it in now. Inflation and the rise in electricity, you're going to lock it in at that price. So now we're getting into dealing with the paybacks for the system. And an example below is the financial incentives throughout the United States. And there are a whole different type of solar incentives. I can spend hours talking about it, but I know everybody has things they want to do, so we're going to cut it down to a couple of incentives. And the first major incentive that everyone in the United States can get, and even foreigners coming into the United States can get, is a 30% tax credit. And basically what this is that you take the entire system cost, including the racking, the inverter, the installation, anything, and 30% of that is a tax. It comes as a tax credit for the system. So it's the material, the labor, the installation, all is part of that. Now, another one of the incentives types is the state credits. And like, for example, Hawaii, North Carolina, New York, those are examples of state credits. Now, if you're in Georgia, they just came up with a 35% state credit that just goes into effect. Louisiana also has a 35% tax credit. So those are some newer ones that are up there. Again, New York has a 25%, and also Hawaii has a 25%. I know a couple people have signed on a little late this evening. However, what we're going to do is at the end of the presentation, we will be sending from YouTube a version of the presentation that you can listen to. Now, getting back, another form of the incentives includes the SREC. And an SREC is what's called a Solar Renewable Energy Credit. And a solar renewable energy credit, basically what that is it's a mechanism from these state governments, including New Jersey, PA, Massachusetts, Maryland. These are examples of these SRECs. And what it is that the state basically says you're producing so much dirty energy, unclean energy, and we want you to produce this clean energy. Well, what they do is they actually require them to produce the clean energy, and the way they monitor is through these SRECs. And they say, hey, you could either get an SREC from yourself or you could buy it from somebody else. And what happens is a lot of times the utility will buy the SREC from a local individual. And there is this market rate. It's almost like a stock. And in New Jersey, the SREC went up to $700 per SREC, and it was a great way to pay for itself. Now, it also did recently with supply going up too much. The SREC value is around, I think, 150 now. So the SREC is not as stable as other mechanisms, but it is a mechanism up in the Northeast. Now, there's also the utility rebates. There are utility rebates all throughout the United States. A couple examples to point out. FP&L down in Florida has a rebate that's going to go in October. TECO and also Duke Energy up in the middle of the state in Florida will have one. PG&E still has, actually PG&E is starting to go lower on their rebate. Southern California Edison still has a little bit of it left. And I know NYSERDA up in upper state New York also has some. Now, if you have any questions about that, we can definitely get into any rebates within your specific geographic location. Now, there's also feed-in tariffs. As we discussed with Keith early on, we discussed about putting the energy back into the grid and getting paid for it. load. And that's an example of the feed-in tariff. There are not too many of them throughout the United States. And again, there's high electric rates. Perfect example is Hawaii. Hawaii has a 30 cents to 38 cents per kilowatt hour. However, they also have a tax credit, and so paybacks can be 2 to 3 years in Hawaii. In Northern California, you have PG&E. If you're in tier number 5 and a high electric rate, you can go from a 30 cents per kilowatt average into about 8 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, below is a typical example of a solar payback analysis for Fresno, California. This is an example of a system that this would be just the material. This would not include labor, but example of material, and this is a 9.6 kW system. The payback on the system is about a 2.9 years, and that's dealing with high electricity. So say you're in tier number 5 and you're going down to tier number 1. So you were at 30 cents per kilowatt hour, now you're going back down to about 12 cents per kilowatt hour. So it's a major way. The internal rate of return is about 38% on this system. And the cash that this system will gain over the lifetime is about $230,000. So it is pretty significant in certain areas of the country. Now, one of the last things is, how do I size my own system? And really, to size your own system, you need to start looking at your habits and what you're doing. And one of the ways we do that is we look at your electric bill in the winter and your summer months. And we're looking at what's your maximum and what's your minimum kilowatt hours that you're using. What we can do is if we can get things such as your electric bills, an email address and a phone number and your zip code, we can actually pinpoint how big a system you need from just that amount of data. And what we can then do is we can actually extrapolate that information, and we can put together a 15-page 25-year financial analysis for you. It's a pretty good analysis. It's just an estimate of based on the system, your cash flow, and your incentives. And if anybody would like to, they could email me, and I can definitely size up a system for you. Now, I'd like to say thank you for everybody joining tonight. The first thing is that if anybody has any questions after the Q&A, you can reach me at jrbooker@peaksolar.com, or reach me on my cell phone, which is 813-482-4871. Again, if you are to go to peaksolar.com, you can reach anybody, a live technician there, or an engineer who can answer any of your questions directly at peaksolar.com. Now, as I said, the webinar will be available for anybody after the seminar. Now, I'd like to go out to any questions that anybody might have. So I'm going to take the floor, and if anybody has any questions, definitely like to. All right, I guess there's not too many questions out there tonight. Again, after this webinar, there is going to be a quick survey. If you could just fill it out and just give any type of feedback, that would definitely help us out in the future. And again, if you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to email me. Okay, I think we have Keith has one question. Hey, Keith.
Hey, I'm sorry, just one quick last question. You didn't talk about it, but it's not really mainstream solar, but I was thinking about getting a solar hot water heater for my pool. Do you know anything about those?
Yeah, we can definitely help you out about solar hot water heaters. So wanted after the presentation, we get together and we can, or you can call me up, and I can talk to you a little bit more about the solar hot water heaters or the solar pool heaters. That's another example of systems that we can definitely do. So, okay, does that sound good, Keith?
Oh, yes, thank you very much. I
Okay.
thought I was muted. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks. All right. Well, thank you everybody for this evening. And again, if you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to email me or give me a call. All right. Thank you very much, and have a great Sunday night.